There is a lot of lost media related to Five Nights at Freddy's, but what I find very baffling is that no one ever talks about them. The only time I ever see any regular mention of FNaF lost media is the lost trailer, which by the way doesn't even exist. So a lot of people probably don't realise that there is actually a ton of lost FNaF fan games. In fact, there are so many that I've literally made a whole iceberg on it. And that's what this video is going to be about. The way most icebergs work is that they go down based on how obscure they are or how dark they are. However, this time it's going to be a bit different. We're going to be going down, and the more we go down is the more lost these games become. With that said, let's begin. To start this list off, we're actually going to be talking about games that are actually not lost. However though, at one point though, they were. However, someone has discovered that they actually have the game and have decided to re-upload it onto GameJolt. If you have any games that are lost that are mentioned as Iceberg, then please re-upload them, it would be much appreciated. The Return to Freddy's games. The Return to Freddy's games were made by Tyler Ahlstrom. Back in 2015, they were some of the most popular FNaF fan games of all time. 4 games were released, and there were many cancelled games that we'll talk about later on in this iceberg. The first Return to Freddy's game came out all the way back in December 2014. This game really hasn't aged well, but at the time it was actually a very groundbreaking FNaF fan game. This game basically showed that you could just completely reuse assets from Five Nights at Freddy's and Scott wouldn't care as long as you didn't try and pass it off as official or try and make money off it. Like I said, there was a lot of planned sequels and planned remakes and planned prequels, however though a lot of it just caused a lot of controversy in development though, and eventually Tyler Ahlstrom completely deleted the Return to Freddy's franchise. Many people have re-uploaded these games, the earliest ones I could find date back to 2019. Unfortunately, the legacy of these games are kinda dead now, as these days most people mainly talk about the games for their controversy. However, there are a few people, including myself, that appreciate how nostalgic they are. Five Nights at Treasure Island. Five Nights at Treasure Island was made in December of 2014 by Anart1996. It's insane to believe that this game was actually lost, considering how it's the most influential FNaF fan game of all time. There were a bunch of FNaF fan games that did come out before Five Nights at Treasure Island, however though, these games were mostly just parodies and mods. Five Nights at Treasure Island was actually only ever released as a 2-night demo before being cancelled in January 2015. After the game's cancellation, there were a bunch of unofficial remakes of the game. In 2020, Radiant's team actually made their own remake, and this actually had help from Anart1996, which is considered to be the definitive version of Five Nights at Treasure Island. And around the same time that the game's released, Radiant's team also put out Five Nights at Treasure Island Archive. This is a GameJolt page that featured many demos of the game, including the official one from 2014, so finally we can actually replay this classic. Five Nights at Sonic's games. This is yet another very popular FNaF fan game franchise that was actually completely lost at one point. Five Nights at Sonic's consisted of 5 games, 4 of them coming out in 2015 and 1 coming out in late 2016. The games were developed by Ian Mario, and the first 4 games were just clones of Five Nights at Freddy's 1 to 4, but with Sonic and Mario characters instead of the main animatronics. In 2018, a group of FNaF fan game developers formed Team Scientix, which would go on to make Five Nights at Sonic's Maniac Mania, which was very popular and caused the original franchise to gain a cult following. In 2018, the original games were removed and were released as Five Nights at Sonic's Collection, which consisted of the first 5 games. Very much like the Return to Freddy's games, there was a lot of drama in the development. And in 2021, the Five Nights at Sonic's Collection was completely removed, rendering the games lost. On June 3rd, 2022, the Five Nights at Sonic's Collection was re-uploaded. However, this exact version seems to have since been removed. Thankfully, there exists many re-uploads of the games now, so hopefully this franchise will never be lost again. FNaF 3 Troll Edition. On February 15th, 2015, Scott Cawthon said that Five Nights at Freddy's 3 was cancelled after the game was hacked and uploaded onto GameJolt. A lot of people were suspicious, especially considering how the file only contains 7 megabytes of storage. Many people claimed that the game was actually a virus. When you download the game, you were met with what would actually become the main menu of Five Nights at Freddy's 3, but when you press play though, it would just be there is no pause button. But with Freddy's head photoshopped onto Animdu's head. 10 minutes after this was posted, Scott Cawthon confirmed that the game was just a prank. The original game drop page has since been removed, but it has been re-uploaded several times though. Five Nights at Toy Freddy's games. Five Nights at Toy Freddy's was a Five Nights at Freddy's fan game franchise developed in 2015 by Ricky G. The games were quite popular back when they first came out, however they faded into obscurity over the years. In 2021, Ricky G uploaded Five Nights at Freddy's Game Maker Edition and Friends, which featured all of his FNaF fan games. However though, Five Nights at Toy Freddy's games were not included. Luckily though, there are several re-uploads of the free Five Nights at Toy Freddy's games. FNaF Mobile. If you've only been part of the FNaF fandom for the last 4 years and you've played the mobile versions of FNaF, you'll probably say that they're not actually that bad and they're pretty much just as good as the ones on the PC and the console. However though, if you were like me, an iPad kid in the mid-2010s, you will know just how terrible the mobile ports of Five Nights at Freddy's 1 to 4 and Sis Location used to be. The frame rates, especially on the jump scares, and the sound quality were just downright terrible. A lot of sounds and sprites were just completely removed altogether. The worst ports by far were definitely FNaF 3 and 4. With the exception of the BB poster, the good ending minigames are literally accessed after you beat a night. So this completely destroys all the fun that is in getting the good ending, considering how all you have to do is just play the game normally, and as long as you know the secrets, then there you go. And FNaF 4's frame rate is beyond abysmal. I mean, just look at this. But also, the minigames are completely removed, thus destroying any lore that the game has. Luckily though, in 2019, the games were updated, and now they are far more tolerable. Although you can still play the old mobile ports though, they have been archived, and as terrible as these games are, not gonna lie, it would definitely be fun to play them again someday. Five Nights at Pokemon. Five Nights at Pokemon was a FNaF fan game created by Hax Moo. It was a combination of the game mechanics from FNaF 1 and FNaF 2, but with Pokemon characters. It was quite a popular game when it first came out in June 2015. Unfortunately though, the game was taken down by Nintendo in late 2016. Thankfully though, the game was re-uploaded onto Game Jolt in 2020. The game was re-uploaded by TKM Alona. Apparently there were other re-uploads that came before this one, but I don't know for sure though. But right now though, this seems to be the only re-upload of Five Nights at Pokemon. Okay, so later on in this Iceberg, I was going to feature Five Nights at Pokemon 2, which was a cancelled sequel to Five Nights at Pokemon. I was going to put Five Nights at Pokemon 2 in this Iceberg at tier 5 to be exact. However though, during the making of this video, the demo for Five Nights at Pokemon 2 was released by Hack Mew. So yeah, this game was found, which is pretty awesome. I didn't even know it even existed, to be honest. So yeah, consider this segment Five Nights at Pokemon's 1 and 2. Toy Freddy Simulator. Toy Freddy Simulator was a FNaF fan game made by Super Luigi Lover. In this game, you get to play as Toy Freddy as well as a fan-made Phantom Toy Freddy and Golden Toy Freddy. This is up there with Bonnie Simulator as being one of the most well-known FNaF simulator games. The game was deleted in 2018 alongside all of Super Luigi Lover's FNaF fan games. They did re-upload a few of their FNaF fan games, however Toy Freddy Simulator was not one of them. Thankfully, many people have re-uploaded this game. Sinister Turmoil. Sinister Turmoil is a free-roam FNaF fan game from 2016. To say that this game's development has been a mess would be an understatement. There have been many demos of this game, many developers, and the full game still hasn't came out to this day. The most recent demo for this game came out in 2020 under the name Sinister Turmoil Sewers. Despite the game only being released in demos, a lot of people really like the games and want to see the full version. The original demo from 2016 has since been removed, but it has been re-uploaded several times. Considering how it's been 4 years since the last demo has been released, it's possible that this game could have been cancelled and just hasn't been revealed to the public. Either that or it's just on a really long hiatus. FNaF Games. FNaF is a FNaF fan game developer best known for the critically acclaimed A Shadow Over Freddy's. He was also part of the Fazbear Fanverse initiative and was going to make FNaF Plus, which was a remastered edition of the first Five Nights at Freddy's game. FNaF has been the subject of many controversies, such as ableism allegations, and also him not liking security breaches despite being part of the fanverse. The worst one, however, though, was when people started criticising him, a lot of his fans sent death threats to them. FNaF's response sparked a lot of outrage. Rather than condemning their actions, he just sent a rickroll which he would commonly use in response to unfaithful criticism. On August 3rd, 2023, FNaF was removed from the fanverse. Shortly after, he took down all of his games off GameJolt. As we've discussed previously on this Iceberg though, if a game gets popularity, it will never be completely lost. Many people have re-uploaded FNaf's games. Jollibees. The Jolly franchise was developed by Ivan G. It is one of the most well-known Five Nights at Freddy's fan game franchises of all time. It was based off the Filipino fast food restaurant Jollibees. In August 2019, the 5th installment would be released, that being titled Jollibees. In July 2020, Ivan G was forced to take down the game after Jollibees found out about the game and demanded it will get taken down. The other games, however, remain up. I think this one got taken down because of the title being an exact copy of the restaurant's name. Despite the reason for the game's removal though, there have actually been several re-uploads of the game that can still be found on GameJolt today. I would recommend installing this game as it might not be long before Jollibees goes around removing all remaining copies of this game. Five Nights at Freddy's 3 The Sequel. Five Nights at Freddy's 3 The Sequel was a Five Nights at Freddy's fan game developed in late 2015. It garnered quite a bit of attention in September 2016 after REUPLOADED played the game. The earliest report of this game being lost that I found dated all the way back to 2019, so this game was lost for quite a long time. The game was re-uploaded in July 2022 by Philips FCS. The Return to Abominations. The Return to Abominations is a FNaF fan game from early 2017. It was well known for having animatronics from Five Nights at Freddy's in probably their most withered forms. The game was remade in late 2023. The original version of the game has since been removed from GameJolt, however there has been many re-uploads of the game. Five Nights in Minecraft. There have been a bunch of Minecraft Five Nights at Freddy's fan games, but possibly the first one to ever be made was Five Nights in Minecraft, made by Ivan G, who would later go on to make the Jolly franchise. The game was first released in February 2015 as a demo, and the full version would come out in April of that year. The game gained a lot of attention in January 2016 after DanTDM played it. In March of 2022, a remastered edition of Five Nights in Minecraft was released. At some point, the original Five Nights in Minecraft was taken off GameJolt. But obviously, a game of this popularity would never be lost forever, as there have been re-uploads of the game. Shadow of Your Nightmare. Shadow of Your Nightmare was a free-roam FNaF fan game made by Glitch5970. The demo was first released in mid-2016 and the full game would come out in early 2017. There were plans for a story mode version of the game, but that was cancelled. At some point, the game was taken off GameJolt. The game was re-uploaded in September 2023 by Mrs. Capybara. Lego FNaF. Lego FNaF is an adaptation of Five Nights at Freddy's 1, but set to look like Legos. It was released in mid-2022, and when it came out, it gained quite a lot of popularity. There were plans for a Lego adaptation of Five Nights at Freddy's 2 and Five Nights at Freddy's 3. However, none of this would happen though, as in late 2022, the game was taken down by Lego. Here's where things get insane though. Re-uploads of the game have also been taken down. I actually created this Iceberg in December of 2023, and the re-upload that existed then has actually been taken down. Right now, there is currently still re-uploads of the game, but I would recommend definitely installing it if you have any interest in playing this game, as it might get taken down, and when that gets taken down, there might never be another re-upload of this game again, and it might end up being completely lost. Now we are actually going to be discussing currently lost media. None of these games are actually completely lost, however though parts of them have been lost. The Return to Freddy's. Whilst all of the complete Return to Freddy's games have been found, there is still a lot of lost media in the Return to Freddy's franchise. Before the release of the Return to Freddy's 2, 2 demos came out. Both of the demos were taken off after the full game came out. Luckily though, both the demos have been re-uploaded onto GameJolt and can be played now. One of the many controversies that the first Return to Freddy's game got into back when it was still Five Nights at Freddy's 3 fan-made was blatantly reusing Candy the Cat and calling it Sugar. Emil Mako demanded that Sugar the Cat was removed from the game, so a re-release of the game was made which removed Sugar from the game. There doesn't seem to be any way to play the original Return to Freddy's that has Sugar the Cat, meaning that the very first build of the Return to Freddy's might be lost. And now we have the Return to Freddy's 5, which is probably one of the most famous cancelled FNaF fan games of all time. There were 3 demos for this game released in late 2015, and there were 2 demos that never actually got released. The only thing that we can see of these lost demos were the title screens. There was allegedly a 3rd demo that never got released, as there is a 3rd unused main menu screen that can be found. But that's the only evidence that could suggest that there was a 3rd build, as this might have just been an unused menu screen for another demo. It's been about 8 years now since the Return to Freddy's 5 got cancelled, so I don't think we'll ever see any of these lost demos. Fazbear Exodus. Fazbear Exodus is a FNaF fan game released in December of 2014. It was an online game where one person controls a night guard and the other controls Freddy. As a night guard, you're supposed to hide from Freddy and Freddy is supposed to find you. While you can still download the game, you can't actually play as all the servers are now down. So you could make the argument that this game is completely lost. However though, because you can still download the game and access it, I wouldn't consider it fully lost. The Joy of Creation Reborn. The Joy of Creation Reborn, created by Nixon, is possibly the most famous FNaF fan game of all time. In 2016, this game scared the shit out of everyone as it showed the animatronics running right at you. To this day, many still consider it to be one of the scariest FNaF fan games ever made. A demo for the game was actually released first. The demo only had Ignited Freddy, but you got to customize the difficulty. However, you can't collect any objectives, and it was basically just an endless game until you got killed. The demo for the Joy of Creation Reborn is now lost. Five Nights at Freddy's multiplayer games. The Five Nights at Freddy's multiplayer games were some of the earliest FNaF fan games ever made. 2 games were made, one was about FNaF 1 and the other was FNaF 2. One of you plays the night guard and the other plays the animatronics who have to try and kill the night guard. These games were actually extremely influential as it seemed to be the first FNaF fan games to actually have the move time, so if it weren't for these 2 games, we may have never got any of the simulator games. Sadly though, both these games suffered the same fate as Fazbear Exodus. While you can still download the games and look at the main menu screen, you can't actually play the games because the servers are long down. One Night at Flumpty's The Egg Collection. One Night at Flumpty's is one of the most well-known FNaF fan game franchises of all time. 2 games were released in 2015 and the 3rd one would come out in 2021. One Night at Flumpty's would actually be the first FNaF fan game to actually get monetized. In 2020, the first game was released on mobile and the next 2 games were released later. The One Night at Flumpty's trilogy was going to get a console release titled One Night at Flumpty's The Egg Collection, which would feature the 3 games all in one. Unfortunately though, the game would never get released. In November of 2021, it was revealed that Jonachrome had dated a 13-year-old girl when he was 21. Once this was revealed, all of his games were pulled from the fanverse, with the mobile ports being taken off and the Egg Collection being cancelled. I think it's certainly possible that the Egg Collection still does exist. Just don't know if it'll ever get released. Only time will tell. Five Nights at Fina's. Five Nights at Fina's was a Five Nights at Freddy's fan game created by Fina Vid. The game was based off fan-made FNaF characters that she had made on DeviantArt, similar to Five Nights at Candy's. Only a demo was released in June of 2015. I was unable to find any information on the game's cancellation, so more of the game could have been programmed but was never released. There was going to be a remake of the game by Amomi666, but that too got cancelled. Considering how it's been almost 9 years since the demo was released and we've got absolutely no updates on it since, I think this will be the only Five Nights at Fina's we'll ever have. Pop Goes. Pop Goes is a FNaF fan game from 2016 developed by Kane Carter. It was very popular when it came out and it would later become part of the Fazbear Fanverse initiative. In 2022 it would get a sequel, Pop Goes Arcade, which as of right now is the only FNaF fan game that has actually been monetized. There were a lot of cancelled Pop Goes games, and I mean a lot. And interestingly, the first Pop Goes game from 2016 actually was in development for about a year. The original build for Pop Goes was cancelled and was never released. The only thing that is left are teasers and development pictures. It's unknown how much the game was developed before it got cancelled. It's been over 8 years now, so I presume Kane Carter doesn't even have the original build of Pop Goes, meaning it's probably lost forever. Five Nights at Wario's Remastered. Five Nights at Wario's Remastered was an unofficial remastered version of the first Five Nights at Wario's game. It was made by the 64th Gamer in 2016. The game was only released as a Night 1 demo as it was cancelled. It has been confirmed that night 1 was the only playable night, however the progress on other nights though isn't exactly clear. There were many reasons for the game's cancellation, one of them being that there was a bug which apparently made the game unplayable. Night 1 remains the only playable night and probably will forever. Final Hours 3. The Final Hours games were developed by Aidan Kelly in 2017. The two games are popular for their unique style of gameplay and good soundtrack. In February 2018, the demo for Final Hours 3 would be released. Sadly, this is all we would get of Final Hours 3. Like many games I've talked about on this Iceberg, Final Hours 3 was unfortunately cancelled. There was a video Aidan Kelly made where he explains in depth as to why Final Hours 3 was cancelled, but that video was deleted and is now lost. But from what I've heard, he cancelled Final Hours 3 due to it causing him stress. Because the video is now lost, I wasn't able to find out how much of the game was programmed before its cancellation. There are actually quite a few people who are trying to remake Final Hours 3, so maybe we will actually get a full version of the game. However though, any unreleased content from the official Final Hours 3 is now lost. Five Nights at Tubbyland. Five Nights at Tubbyland was a FNaF fan game franchise developed by Clicky Code. All three of the games were released in 2015. In December of 2015, the first two games received updates. The first game added an extra 2 nights and had better graphics. Although when this remastered version came out, the original version was removed and is now lost. The same thing happened to Five Nights at Tubbyland 2, but the graphics were the same and really the only thing that was added was an extra night. 8-Bit Freddy's. 8-Bit Freddy's was a FNaF fan game that was first released as a demo in January 2015 and the full game would come out in March of 2015. The game was a series of fan-made mini-games based off the FNaF 2 and 3 mini-games. These games though were taken off GameJolt and were both lost media for a very long time. But then, in November 2023, the demo of 8-Bit Freddy's was found. Sadly though, the full version is still lost. But the fact that we have found the demo though is still great and it definitely gives hope for finding the full version. The Joy of Creation Reborn 2D. The Joy of Creation Reborn 2D was a 2D version of Joy of Creation Reborn. I don't think I need to really explain that, to be honest. It was developed by Clarkin123. It was basically the Joy of Creation Reborn but in a maze. There was a remake of the game, simply titled The Joy of Creation Reborn 2D Better Edition. Once again, I think the title is pretty self-explanatory. These games are surprisingly actually quite influential, as there's actually quite a lot of 2D versions of The Joy of Creation Reborn as well as the original Joy of Creation. The original version of the game luckily can still be played, sadly though the Better Edition is now lost. Now the moment you've all been waiting for, we are finally going to be talking about FNaF fan games that are completely lost. As of the time I'm recording this video, you cannot play any of these games in any shape or form. The Return to Freddy's games. Yep, I'm still not done talking about the Return to Freddy's. I've already talked about how the first 4 Return to Freddy's are found, but Return to Freddy's 5 is partially lost. However though, there are 6 games that were never even released. One of them was the Return to Freddy's Frank Burt. It was supposed to take place in between the events of the Return to Freddy's 4 and 5. Quite a few images from the game can be viewed. There have been quite a few unofficial remakes of the game. All that was programmed of this game though is lost. Another unreleased game was Radzler, which was lost for about 3 years. Until in 2019, one of the beta testers, Toonster Games, re-uploaded the demo. However though, it was about as finished as any of the Return to Freddy's 5 demos. Nothing really happens, you just sit in an office and do nothing. Very much like Frank Burt's though, this game was remade. And there were plans to remaster the entire Return to Freddy's quadrilogy. However though, nothing is known about these games, and it's believed that these games were cancelled before they even begun development. Another Story of Freddy's. Another Story of Freddy's was a FNaF fan game developed by RiseMac. The game was cancelled very early on in development, but what was finished of the game was released in late 2016. Despite the game literally being unbeatable, the game was actually praised for its graphics and jump scares. Despite the game not being finished, this is by far the most famous lost FNaF fan game of all time. In fact, with the Lost trailer being a hoax, this actually might be the most famous Lost media in all of FNaF. Apparently RiseMac doesn't even have the game anymore, so the only way this game's ever getting found is if someone who already downloaded the game still has it. Five Nights at Toy Freddy's 4. I've already mentioned the Five Nights at Toy Freddy's games and how they were all lost media at some point. But what I didn't tell you though is that 4 games are made, and only 3 of those 4 games were actually found. Five Nights at Toy Freddy's 4 still remains lost. Ricky G has confirmed that he does have the Five Nights at Toy Freddy's games and does plan on re-uploading them at some point. He hasn't specifically confirmed whether or not he does have Five Nights at Toy Freddy's 4 or not. But with that news though, it certainly is possible that this game could get found at some point. Wallace's Cheesy Curse of Cheesiness. Wallace's Cheesy Curse of Cheesiness was a FNaF fan game based off Wallace and Gromit. In this game you play as Gromit and you have to try and eat all of Wallace's cheese without him catching you. This is actually one of the few Lost FNaF fan games that I actually played back when it came out. And while the game didn't really have much to offer, the concept was honestly genius and I thought the game was very funny, which is why I was quite sad when I found out that this game is now lost. A rubbed edit that I had to make in post-production. Great news, Wallace's Cheesy Curse of Cheesiness was actually found before this video even began development. Regardless though, the game is now found though, which means this segment has, well, aged pretty poorly. But we have the game though, yay! Roblox fan games. Ever since 2014, there have been thousands of Roblox FNaF fan games, ranging from roleplay games, parody games, and FNaF adaptations. With a quantity of Roblox fan games this high, it's no surprise that many of them have been lost. But to be honest, saying many of them are lost is probably an understatement. While it's not being confirmed, I would say the majority of Roblox FNaF fan games are now lost. On Roblox, you don't download the games, you just play them. So when a Roblox game gets deleted, most of the time the game will be lost forever. Night Shift at Sparky's. Sparky the dog is probably the most infamous hoax in all of FNaF. In fact, he is so famous that he even makes a cameo in the FNaF movie. So there's no surprise that there was a FNaF fan game based off the hoax. Night Shift at Sparky's came out in March of 2015. While the game was available, it was met with mostly negative reviews, with the game apparently having loads of glitches and people also criticised the animatronic designs, saying it looked too similar to the works of Emil Mako. Night Shift at Sparky's is now lost, but in 2021, Stojo made a rebuilt version of the game, although the original Night Shift at Sparky's is completely lost. Five Nights at Freddy's The First Chapter. Little to no information is known about Five Nights at Freddy's The First Chapter. It seems like it was released as a teaser game in mid-2016. There's a good chance that if you're watching this you've never heard of this game, however you've probably heard of the Unwithered Nightmare animatronics. Well, they originated from this game, which exists as SFM models as well as a mod in FNaF AR. Despite how little of the game was released, many people, myself included, were very excited to see if the full game would be made. Which it wasn't. At some point the game was cancelled and the demo is now lost. Five Nights at Mikey's. Five Nights at Mikey's was a FNaF fan game developed in March 2015 by Communist Balloons. The game was sort of popular for a bit when it first came out. The full version of the game was never actually released, it was only released in 2 demos. Both of those demos are now completely lost. Project Box. Project Box was a cancelled FNaF fan game developed by Mediocre Mel. In October of 2018, the game was already cancelled, but a trailer for the game though was still released. A lot of people thought the game looked amazing, and a lot of people, myself included, were also sad to find out this game was no longer in development. The game was never released in any shape or form and is lost media. Chum Chum Games is currently working on a remastered version of the game and has released a demo, with the gameplay being taken from the trailer. Apparently the game is still in development, so we might get a full version of Project Box. However, the original will probably remain lost forever. Five Nights at Candy's Simulator. Five Nights at Candy's Simulator was one of the most well-known FNaF simulator games. Earlier on I said that if a game becomes very popular it will never become lost media. Well, this is an exception, as despite how popular this game was, it's actually lost media now. Mario in animatronic horror. Mario and Animatronic Horror was an RPG fan game developed in 2017. This is another one of the few lost FNaF fan games that I actually played back when it was available. And if I were to best describe it, imagine if SMG4 made a FNaF fan game. The game did have quite a niche following, but those who played the game, including myself, loved it. And the fact that this gem is lost media is honestly heartbreaking. It was rumoured for a long time that the game was taken down by Nintendo, but Galactic Star, the developer, has confirmed that they're the one who actually took the game down. The reason behind this is because Galactic Star does not like the game. This has led to a lot of backlash. Despite that though, I still find it quite shocking that no one's re-uploaded the game, although one reason is possibly because a lot of people think that the game was taken down by Nintendo, which means that if they were to re-upload the game, they might end up getting in trouble. But this is all just one misconception. Nintendo never actually took the game down. If you guys happen to have this game, please, for God's sake, re-upload it! Actually, there's no need for that, because during the final edit of this video I found out that Mario and Animatronic Horror is not actually lost anymore. There have been attempts at re-uploading the game onto Itch.io and GameJolt, but they were all taken down. However though, you can actually still play the game using the Internet Archive. Like Wallace's cheesy curse of cheesiness, the finding of this game went well under the radar. So hopefully with the release of this video, loads of people will finally realise these games can actually be played now. I know a lot of people probably ask me in the comments, why don't I just re-upload these games that I played? Well, the answer is pretty simple, I don't have them anymore. The computer that had all these games is now long gone. Final Nights Redux. This is yet another game that absolutely blew me away when I found out it was lost media. And the reason why is because this game isn't actually lost media. Yeah, like Wallace's cheesy curse of cheesiness, this is another game that I thought was lost media, but after doing more research, I found out that it isn't. I'm still going to show you the segment though, because I promise you guys there'll be no lost media in this video, even though there have been alternate takes, so therefore there is, but I digress. The Final Nights games developed by Jellium is often considered by many to be one of the best FNaF fan game franchises of all time. Final Nights Redux was a remake of the first Final Nights game. However though, it was only released as a demo in late 2016 before it was cancelled, and after that the GameDrop page was deleted and this game is now lost media. Sure, this game wasn't really anything significant, but I'm still shocked that no one has re-uploaded it. Flash fan games. There were many FNaF fan games that can be played with Adobe Flash Player. Many consider 2020 to be one of the worst years of all time, mainly because of COVID. But for me, the worst thing that happened was a discontinuation of Adobe Flash Player. When Flash was discontinued, God knows how many games became lost media. Luckily, many Flash games have been re-uploaded onto other websites, but many of them, though, are now lost forever. Five Nights in Heaven. Five Nights in Heaven is possibly the most popular FNaF fan game that is currently lost. It came out in January 2015 and it was also known as Animatronic Dating Simulator. After hearing that alias, you probably know what this game was about. The game was only released as a demo and was cancelled at some point, and you see where this is going. It was removed from GameJolt and is now lost. On GameJolt there is a supposed re-upload of the game by TextMac, but from what I've heard though, this is a troll game and some even claim that it's a virus. Unfair FNaF games. The Unfair FNaF games was a night in Five Nights at Freddy's 1 to 3, but the difficulty was ranked up to the extreme. They were specifically designed to be rage-inducing. For example, in FNaF 3, you can't actually reboot any of the errors. I'm not sure exactly if this is true, but I've heard some people saying the games were actually impossible. The games are all lost now. In Tier 4, I'm still going to be discussing lost games, however these ones are a bit more interesting than the ones in Tier 3. Five Nights at the Haunted House. There is very little known about Five Nights at the Haunted House. In fact, there is only one video of this game that you can find on YouTube. The reason being is because this was a very obscure FNaF fan game. That wasn't until Andy Matronic played it, and after that, this became one of the most hated FNaF fan games of all time. The opening of the game shows a series of news articles. Two news articles are on a missing person, and it was later revealed that these were real news articles. To make matters worse, both of these people were later found out to have been murder victims. This sparked a lot of outrage, so much so that the game was actually taken off Google Play. I highly doubt this game will ever get found. One, because pretty much no one played this game before it was taken down, and two, because I think most people would probably say this game is better off lost. Those Nights at Fredbear's. The first FNaF fan game that Nixon released was A Joy of Creation. However, the first one they actually started working on was actually a game called Those Nights at Fredbear's. It was going to be a free roam game, and by the looks of it was the inspiration for the Joy of Creation Reborn. When the trailer dropped in August of 2015, loads of people were really hyped up. In fact, even Scott Cawthon himself wanted to see the game come out. This might be a common misconception, but free roam FNaF fan games have actually existed since 2014. But none were ever really that popular, and it was just kind of considered a failed experiment. But when this came out, it looked like we were finally going to get that free roam FNaF fan game that we wanted for so long. However though, we would never get this game. Those Nights at Fredbear's was cancelled, there was never any demos released or anything, so the game is completely lost. Luckily though, in 2016, Those Nights at Fredbear's was remade and released. Finally, we can actually play this gem. Oh, for fuck's sake! Yeah, this is a double whammy lost media. Not only is Those Nights at Fredbear's lost, but the unofficial remake is also lost. This was remade by Glitch5970. This is also another lost FNaF fan game that I actually played, and I remember it being really good, although it is your run-of-the-mill 2016 free roam FNaF fan game. There are actually plans for a sequel, however though that was cancelled. Thankfully, Those Nights at Fredbear's is still not completely lost, as another remake, New Destiny, was made in 2020. So far it has only been released as a free night demo and the full game is still in development, but hey, we still actually have the game. The Ignited. The Ignited was a Joy of Creation fan game released in 2018. The game was very similar to the Joy of Creation Reborn. The game was very obscure and there might actually only be one video of the game. The Ignited is now a lost game. It's possible that Nixon might have taken the game down due to being too similar to the Joy of Creation Reborn, but I don't know if this is actually true. Early FNaF fan games. Though it hasn't been confirmed, I would say that probably at least half of the early FNaF fan games are now lost. These days, there are many FNaF fan games that people actually consider to be better than all of the actual FNaF games. Although in early 2015, that wasn't the case at all. In early to mid 2015, most FNaF fan games were very low quality and many of them were made by kids. Therefore, preserving a FNaF fan game wasn't really taken seriously as most of them didn't really have a fan base. And many of these developers are now adults looking back cringing and don't want to be associated, so they delete their game drop page. So now we have an absolute tsunami of lost FNaF fan games from this era. Night with the Rust animatronics. The Night with the Rust animatronics games were free roam FNaF fan games from 2016. When the first game came out, no one noticed it, but the second game though was actually quite popular. At some point though, both of these games were removed from Game Jolt. One of them was found, but one of them however though remains lost. And that was the first Night with the Rust animatronics games, which was actually the one that is found. I have no idea how this has happened, but the first Night with the Rust animatronics game, which like I said, no one really cared about, is found, but the second one is actually still lost. Niche games. I'm sure many of you are aware of this, believe it or not, this segment is going to go into details about child rape, and I know a lot of people are very sensitive to that topic, so skip to about 2 minutes ahead if you don't want to hear any of that. Niche, also known as Blackout, is best known for Dormitorbis, which went from a critically acclaimed FNaF fan game to now being possibly the most hated FNaF fan game of all time. Since the game's release, it has been revealed that Niche has done some pretty gross stuff. In fact, he's done so many bad stuff that I don't think I can go through all of them as it will take too long. But the worst thing he's probably done is sent nudes to a minor. And since all this has been made public, people have drawn attention to the fact that in Dormitorbis, it is implied that Garvey, the game's equivalent of William Afton, rapes a 15-year-old girl. And there's actually a tape where Garvey goes into a lot of details for how fun it was to do that. This has caused a lot of people to believe that the entire rape element of Dormitorbis was just one of Niche's sick fantasies. Also, since his behaviour has been outed, a lot of people have harassed Niche, which has caused him to delete all of his games except for Dormitorbis. Most games that were developed by Niche are now completely lost. Five Nights with Mac Tonight 3. The Five Nights with Mac Tonight games were developed by Mallrat from 2017 till 2019. The fourth installment of the game was Five Nights with Mac Tonight 3, which was praised for its novel concept of taking place on a boat. Originally though, Five Nights with Mac Tonight 3 was supposed to be a Five Nights at Freddy's 4 fan game. A trailer for the game was uploaded in July 2017, which showcased some of the gameplay. However, the game was cancelled and was never released in any shape or form and is now lost. In fact, the Five Nights at Max Night 3 that we have now was actually a revival of the idea which came out a year after the game was first announced. Now I know some of you might be thinking, why is there Spanish subtitles in this video? Well, the reason why is because the original trailer doesn't seem to be available anymore. You can only watch a trailer in the form of REUPLOADED by ZX. Five Nights at Freddy's Better Edition. Five Nights at Freddy's Better Edition, released in 2018, is quite literally a pirated copy of the first Five Nights at Freddy's game but released for free. There were a few things changed, but for the most part though, it's the same game. It has since been taken off GameJolt and is now lost media. Interestingly though, I wasn't able to find out why this game was removed, but I think it being a pirated clone of FNaF 1 definitely was a reason. Maybe Scott Cawthon demanded it got taken down, maybe GameJolt took it down, or maybe the creator just took it down to avoid a lawsuit. FNaF Plus. This segment is going to be quite brief because I already talked about a lot of it in the FNaF Games segment. After FNaF was dropped from the fanverse, the Steam page for FNaF Plus was taken down. All posts that FNaF made in relation to FNaF Plus has also been taken down. It hasn't actually been confirmed if the game's cancelled or not, but I think it's pretty obvious that it is. FNaF Plus being dropped from the fanverse pretty much defeats the whole purpose of its existence. And if FNaF still went ahead and finished the game, I'm sure Scott would probably take it down. So I think it's safe to say that FNaF Plus is cancelled and is probably going to be lost forever. Lazada Pelodi FNaF 4. This right here is perhaps the most lost FNaF fan game. There is literally no gameplay footage of this game whatsoever. The only surviving things about this game are a few images. In May of 2015, an App Store user by the name of Lazada Pelodi uploaded what they titled as Five Nights at Freddy's 4. Apparently though, the game's gameplay was nothing like FNaF and was just a crappy 2D platformer. The fact that it had nothing to do with FNaF just made a lot of people think that this was intended to scam people into thinking it was the actual FNaF 4. And this most likely was the case, because this game was actually monetized at $10. The game was only available for a very short period of time before Scott Cawthon took the game down. If you want to know more about this game, I'd recommend watching Theft King's video on the game, which is how I first heard about it. Now we have finally made it to the final tier in this iceberg. We are done discussing lost FNaF fan games, now we are discussing FNaF fan games that may or may not have even existed. Five Nights at Fuckboys 3 April Fools. The Five Nights at Fuckboys games are made by Sable Katmai and Joshua Shaw. They were some of the first FNaF fan games to become popular and are some of the most iconic FNaF fan games of all time. In May of 2015, IU made a video called Top 100 Best FNaF Fan Games. Number 33 was Five Nights at Fuckboys 3 April Fools. When I first saw this video, I just kind of brushed it off and didn't really consider it. But I've recently tried finding the Five Nights at Fuckboys 3 April Fools edition, and when I tried to find it, I found absolutely no other proof that this game ever existed. The only logical explanation to this is that there was an April Fool's version that just went under the radar. But I find that incredibly hard to believe. Here's a little known fact. Five Nights at Fuckboys 3 was so anticipated that when the game came out, it actually crashed GameJolt. So even an April Fool's version of the game should at the very least be well known lost media. Judging by the footage, it seems this April Fool's version was just the first Five Nights at Fuckboys game, but you play as Springtrap instead of Freddy at the start. Now, I know many would probably say that this game shouldn't be in existence unconfirmed, as there is gameplay footage which does kind of prove that this game did exist. But considering how this is the only source of the game's existence, I just really can't bring myself to believe this game was ever actually real. The only other explanation I can think of is that on April Fool's Day 2015, the first Five Nights at Fuckboys game, maybe everyone became Springtrap, but only for that one day or something. I really don't know. If you guys have any information on this, please let me know in the comments. Stuff 3 The Grand Reopening. Stuff The Real Begin was a FNaF 1 texture mod made by Fedriz Marini. It was one of the first FNaF mods to become popular, coming out in February 2015. Later in June of 2015, Stuff 2 Five Nights at Federtronics was released, which was a FNaF fan game which had many of the characters in Stuff The Real Begin. In December of 2015, a third installment was announced, Stuff 3 The Grand Reopening. The game, however, though, was cancelled. It was confirmed that the game had begun development, but it was never actually said whether or not the game was ever at any point actually playable before it was cancelled. So it's unclear whether or not to actually call this a lost FNaF fan game, as it may have never actually been programmed. The only thing that has been released of this game were a few teaser images. Five Nights at Rock Bottom. There were two SpongeBob FNaF fan games developed by Dakota Wood in 2015, Five Nights at Krusty Krab and Five Nights at the Chum Bucket. And in 2022, a third game was released called Five Nights at the Krusty Krab Chapter 3. However though, there was originally going to be a third installment of the game called Five Nights at Rock Bottom, which began development in late 2015. Like Stuff 3, a few teasers were released and it was confirmed the game did begin development, but how much of the game was programmed, or if any of it was even programmed, has not actually been confirmed. The only proof that would suggest that this game was playable is that the cameras were actually developed and so was the map, but ultimately though, there isn't any solid evidence to prove that this game was ever actually playable. Fright Night. In May of 2016, a user named Games Production teased a FNaF fan game called Fright Night on DeviantArt. The post contained a link to the game's GameJolt page, but the GameJolt page has since been deleted. This picture that I'm showing you right now is the only image that was released of the game. Literally nothing else is known about it, so it's very possible this game may have never actually existed. Those Nights at Rachel's 2. Those Nights at Rachel's was a FNaF fan game developed by Nixon in January of 2016. It was one of the many FNaF fan games that proved that FNaF fan games can be on an even higher quality as actual FNaF. On April Fool's Day 2018, Those Nights at Rachel's 2 was released. As you might suggest by the release date, it was a complete joke. In this game, you go around shooting the animatronics from Those Nights at Rachel's. What you may not know though, is that there actually was going to be an actual Those Nights at Rachel's 2. A few teasers for the game were released. Other than that though, I wasn't able to find any information on the game's development. It's been confirmed that Those Nights at Rachel's 2 definitely was planned, but it's unknown if it actually ever began development. Pop Goes games. There were 7 cancelled Pop Goes games. That's right, 7. I've already talked about the 2015 Pop Goes, and in this segment I'm going to talk about the rest of them. With the exception of 2, it's not been confirmed if any of these ever actually existed or were just concepts. One of them was Pop Goes Silent Night, which is intended on being an update for the original 2015 Pop Goes. Another one was Pop Goes Encore, which was a planned sequel to Pop Goes before the game was even released. This one has been confirmed to be non-existent. Another was Pop Goes 2, which is a sequel to Pop Goes that was planned after the game was released. Another one is Pop Goes 0, which is actually going to be created by Fiznum. There was also Pop Goes Reprinted, which is going to serve as a remake of the first game as well as a sequel. And then there is Pop Goes Finale, which is the only cancelled Pop Goes game that ever actually got released. Unless by some miracle Kane Carter watched this video and leaves a comment confirming the status of these games, it's unknown whether or not these games were ever actually programmed or how much were. I've been posting videos on YouTube ever since 2014, and this is by far the biggest project I think I've ever made. I really hope this video will help shed light on lost FNaF fan games. If there's any interesting lost FNaF fan games that I didn't mention, please let me know about them in the comments. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching this video, and bye.